Good afternoon, everyone. If I could have your attention following your most wonderful lunch. So, I'm Jim Hemmington, Director of Procurement at the BBC, and this slot is called Will Technology Kill the Procurement Star? And of course, because we're talking about the future, I thought it was pretty appropriate to go back to 1977. Top of the pops. Buggles. Some of you over a certain age will remember those one-hit wonders who predicted that video will kill the radio star. And that was at the time in the 70s when all music was going on to video and the radio industry was under attack. Unfortunately for Buggles, not only did they only have one hit, but their prediction was wrong. Radio 2 still attracts an audience daily of about 14 million people in the UK, and its audience share is predicted to grow. So radio is still a big thing apart from video. So my hypothesis will be that we see technology, but will it actually kill the procurement star? I'm hoping to persuade you otherwise. So let's start. So just to be clear, what is the threat from technology? And because people of my age see anything new as a threat, we should also think about opportunities as well, because obviously technology offers us a huge amount of opportunity. But this is the sort of thing that's going on. More organisations are plugged into digital platforms now. Digital platforms and cloud solutions are at the forefront of what competitive organisations are doing. Digital transformation continues at a huge pace, and those of you that go to conferences regularly will keep hearing digitisation, if you can say it, unlike me, is the future for organisations, and if they don't digitise quickly, then they're going to fall over at some point in the future. New software is emerging on an almost daily basis, and you'll see that through the sort of apps that have become available to you almost by the day. And organisations, particularly smaller, more agile organisations, are adopting new technologies very, very quickly. And the big one for me, and I think the big one for procurement, is this robotics world that we're starting to move into, and machines doing more and more what people do. And it really came a focus for me, actually, because we moved our finance outsource service from one provider to IBM, actually, back in November last year. They're taking out huge costs in our finance and accounting services, and the prime strategy to do that is the deployment of machines instead of people. So about 100 heads coming out of the provision of that service and being replaced by machines. It's great for me because I can get to save lots and lots of money, but for people involved in some of those industries, it can be a bit frightening. So, it gets scarier as well. It gets scarier. I've got some facts here that have come from some economists, and we know economists are always accurate in their predictions. 20%, by 2018, 20% of business activity will be automated, either done by computers or done by robots or done by some form of mechanical machinery. There will be in excess of 6 billion items of technology connected. So organisations and connectivity will be not only globally, but in every part of everything we do on a daily basis. Even your fridge will be able to talk to NASA. And this other area is quite interesting. This hyper-adaptive customer will be the norm. So the genesis of this was first in the iPad story. So you can see there, with iPads, 80 million iPads sold in 2 years. 80 million. Compare that to the great colour TV story, which obviously is a greater story than iPad, but only 50,000 units sold in 2 years. So when the colour TV became available back in the late 60s, it took 2 years to sell 50,000 of them. And of course, we all know the reason for that is because technology is so cheap these days. And then even scarier, and I'm starting again to see it in some of the services at the BBC, is that man and machine interaction is becoming more and more seamless. And you as a customer consuming services out there, you won't even know that you're dealing with a machine rather than a human. And the first signs of that are in web chat. And the BBC is looking to deploy web chat in terms of its audience interfacing, either through iPlayer or through when you ring the BBC. So when you ring up to complain about the weather, there's a good chance that a robot will be able to reassure you that the weather will improve tomorrow. So these are the predictions. And for procurement, imagine this, imagine. So here's a picture of a guy who had a huge imagination, John Logie Baird, who invented the telly. And there he is with his very sophisticated machine that he used to broadcast the first television signal in 1936 from Alexander Pally. There was only 500 TVs that could receive it, and if you were to buy one back in 1936, it would have been the equivalent of about £14,000. So you needed some dosh. So you imagine one day most households would have a telly. So in procurement, can you imagine now that in the future your suppliers will be selected and changed automatically by automation? That what you pay for your goods and services, your machines will benchmark that through all this internet interconnectivity that we have, and suppliers who aren't sharing their prices won't be dealing with organisations. So your machines will check and benchmark how good a price you're getting daily. Can you also imagine that your machines will start to identify those suppliers that are quite strategically critical to your business, and then start to monitor them in terms of their financial performance, the contracts that they're winning, the contracts that they're losing, to see how stable those organisations are going to be. And if there's any hint of instability, your machines will make sure that they look for alternative and sustainable suppliers. Can you imagine that automated intercompany trading is the norm, linked to your consumption with auto goods receipting? So here in the BBC, when we need more supplies, purchase orders go out automatically to our suppliers, machines dispatch those purchase orders, they may even arrive by drone. And there's no human interaction at all. And can you also imagine that when this gets really, really sophisticated, the governance reviews, KPI reporting, and correction plans are all done by machines. So if your suppliers turn up late, your machine will talk to your supplier's machine to make sure that they adjust their distribution systems, because their vehicles are all tracked by GPS anyway. So imagine that, and imagine, could it actually go this far? Okay, so I'll be taking my grandchildren, or perhaps great-grandchildren for me, to the V&A Museum, not too distant future, to this great exhibition where I can see artifacts from a long-gone profession, okay, including paper purchase orders, balanced scorecards, negotiation videos, or perhaps DVDs, or whatever the media is then. And if I'm really interested in the whole show, the great purchasing manuals. Could it actually go that far in the future as far as procurement's concerned? So I put it to you that it won't get that far. And I think future procurement functions in organisations will play an increasingly valuable role. And technology will remain as an enabler, but it will not replace the good things that strategic procurement does for organisations. Now, one of the things I'm constantly reminded by our executive committee is that I have to do my bit to show that the BBC is well run, so that all you guys as licence fee payers feel that your money is being well spent. So I benchmark the procurement function quite regularly, and last year I had it benchmarked by an organisation who I won't name because they didn't give me the discount that I asked for. So perhaps they'll learn from that, hopefully. And they reiterated the sort of the strategic thinking where procurement needs to go for the future. And it's three things. It's to become a trusted business partner. Now, other functions are being told to do this. You know, finance people are told to become a business partner. Even lawyers are being told to become a business partner to help their business move forward. And it's the same for procurement. Be a trusted business partner. Be more proactive. Understand the strategic direction of your organisations. Become a strategic function, not a service function. The regular one there, make sure that you continue to reduce your costs and purchasing costs, not just in getting the good deals, but how you consume and the kind of buying behaviours that are going on in your business. Get real deep understanding of that. And thirdly, be agile. Don't be that function that's the old oil tanker, taking months to change its processes and procedures. Be the speedboat moving alongside the business, weaving in and out, responding to economic and environmental storms. That's where you need to go. But as we know with benchmarking and people that come in and do it for us, moving that from PowerPoint into practical application is a really difficult challenge. So here is the hypothesis for procurement. I think procurement has two secret weapons. There may even be three, or there may even be four. I don't want to get into a sort of Monty Python type thing here. But there are certainly at least two. The first is if you're functioning as a strategic operation in your business, your procurement people will be very, very savvy and understand your business extremely well. They'll have honed commercial skills. They'll have integrated technical expertise. So they're not just talking about buying. They'll understand how technology can be used. They'll understand how customer experiences and changes in customer behaviours could impact your suppliers and your supply chain. They'll be creative, continually looking for new ways to make your organisation better than the competition. Advanced personal skills, rounded market knowledge, and thinking about the way ahead. Machines will always be quite limited in that space, I'm pleased to say. The second secret weapon, I think, and there's time for questions after, and you may agree, you may choose to disagree with some of these conclusions, is that procurement has that helicopter view of what's going on in the business. And it's more about big data, and it's not about data and spend analysis. It's about understanding the business environment, learning from the good and the bad things that work from your business, and more importantly, because machines will never do this, understand the organisation's culture, what it's there to do, and what works well. They are, without doubt, in my view, the two secret weapons that procurement has. So I'm going to outline to you 4 steps for the procurement function in the future. I'd like to say it's rocket science, but your analysis will be it's probably more common sense. And the first step, really, I think, is to create the excitement about the impact that a strategic procurement function can have for your organisation. And it isn't always elementary, because it is quite hard to do. So for the BBC team, I have a team of 80 people in the BBC. We manage a spend of about £1.5 billion. It's about 20% of the licence fee. So what we do has a significant impact on the BBC's business and its ability to compete with an ever-increasing market. So we have a number of straplines. The one that we've had for some time now is that the procurement function is about generating more money for programmes. That's what we're here to do. We're here to make sure the BBC has as much money as it can to throw at the screen. Because unlike our competitors like Sky and Netflix and ITV, they can just increase their subscriptions and they can ask their advertisers and sponsors to pay more. Unfortunately, we can't do the same with licence fee payers. We have to stretch every pound as far as it can go. And procurement has a huge strategic impact on that. Last year, my team saved £76 million, and that actually would fund a channel like BBC 4. So its strategic impact can be important. But never assume that people who work in your function know that. We protect the BBC's reputation. We're very proud to show suppliers that we're open for business, that we're transparent, and that if you've got something good for us, we will listen to you. And protecting the reputation is a big thing for us. We like to think that we show licence fee payers that we spend the BBC's money wisely, and in particular the licence fee payer money wisely. But we also continue to have a strategic impact. So Tony Hall, our Director General, at the beginning of this calendar year set out a new vision for the BBC that will take us to about 2022. That's our centenary. And he has a vision to make iPlayer not just a catch-up service, but a platform of choice for all people in the UK to get their content. Okay, so Netflix has been challenging us for some years. We're going out to see if we can challenge them. So procurement and the suppliers that are going to help us do that, we don't know who they are yet. And my job and the job of my team, working closely with the business, is to find them and to make sure that we create that strategic vision for the BBC into the future. And then this is the one that we use always for those sceptical people in the business about whether procurement really is a strategic function for the BBC, is that every pound the BBC spends on the procurement function, it gets a return of 13. And in fact, next year, our budget is increasing, so I can recruit some more people to push that figure up further. So creating that excitement, not just for the people who work in procurement, but those stakeholders in your business who are dependent on procurement and do not always know that they have a dependency on procurement. And the frustrating thing for me is that when we get a new director in who has a perception of what procurement does in a business, sometimes the conversation goes, so who does our FM supply? Because I was in the toilet the other day and there was no toilet paper. And obviously we talk about the SLAs that we have for replenishing toilet paper. And I said that I've actually looked at making sure that there's 100% availability of toilet paper in all of our toilets all of the time. Unfortunately, that means taking some of our programme spend and spending it on FM facilities. So once we get through that conversation, we then start talking about their business priorities and what they are expecting and what their business challenges are. And then we start to have a sensible discussion about how procurement can ensure that they work with those business stakeholders to get the right suppliers doing the right things for their strategy. So, step one, create the excitement. Step two, is create this business partner framework. And I'm just going to spend a few moments because I've heard a lot about creating business partnerships for procurement, and I've not seen a huge amount in terms of what that translates to this practical application. So the very first thing, of course, is developing a strategy. So I'm working now quite closely with our Chief Technology Officer, our Director of Workplace, our Marketing Director, and working closely with their senior management teams to understand what their strategy is for the future, and making sure that procurement develop what I have now, a 5-year plan to support the delivery of their strategies from a supplier perspective. So that really starts the partnering discussion off on a good footing. More and more we're getting our people embedded in the business, so they actually work in those areas, and it's working particularly well in technology and marketing, where I have people that have worked in those areas for a good couple of years now, and they're seen as being part of the marketing and strategic technology teams. Procurement needs to be seen as facilitators right through the life cycle of the supply activity. So it's not just about getting the best deal, and one of the things that we were doing at the BBC was doing a lot of this kind of let and leave strategy, as we called it. We influenced a huge amount of the spend. We put in place frameworks. We drove the prices to where they needed to be, and then we left those frameworks off to the business. And what we found was in the use of those frameworks, the value element started to degrade very, very quickly. So more and more, we're looking at not just getting the deals in place, but managing the relationships and working with the business to make sure they understand how they can get the best from those relationships. And then we have don't focus on the savings alone. So my 5-year strategy, you won't be surprised to hear, has got a big savings number attached to it. But the exec board want me to do a number of other things too that creates sustainable benefits for the BBC. Use data to inform and drive business decisions with proactive support to stakeholders. Last year, I sent my guys out with a huge amount of data. We've got data coming out of our ears. I can tell you how many people take taxi journeys in the BBC to, where from, who's in the taxis. I can tell you how many flights we have annually. I can tell you how many people we send to the Olympics and all that kind of stuff. I churn this stuff out to the business guys and I say, that's all very interesting, but what does it tell me? So one of the things that we're doing more and more of now is getting a handle on what that data is actually telling us so that we can do things like investing more in video conferencing to cut down the huge travel spend between our centres in London and Manchester. So we've been operating out of Manchester. All sport, breakfast news, children's telly, all comes out of Manchester. There's a huge link to the BBC strategy. And we've been sending people up and down and up and down a huge cost. And using analysis to get an understanding of how we can change some behaviours there, investing a bit more technology, has driven those costs down and, yes, provided more money for programme making. Make sure your resource is focusing on the market so that you can start looking at innovation and risk. And I think we've heard from some speakers this morning talking about, being competitive by knowing what's going on outside your organisation and particularly your supplier base. Maximising things like supplier relationship management to drive those costs. And if we go out to reprocurement to replenish a framework and we've replaced and we find we make a huge saving in replacing that framework, we failed in the relationship of those suppliers because we should have been making those savings through those relationships. And you need that sponsorship from the top. The Deputy Director General has allowed me last year for the first time to bring in good procurement practice into the way that we buy programmes. Very, very exciting. And we're starting again to see some clear benefits from that. So, step 3, identify and nurture the talent. And I'm sorry I've had to use an ITV programme there to illustrate this particular principle, so please forgive me for that. And we're saying really 4 things here. Procurement is very different in different organisations. What makes procurement people effective in yours? You need to think about that, because bringing people in who can buy and place orders and negotiate contracts may not be necessarily the right thing. Have you got a strong diversity of competencies of skills? Because if you actually took a straw poll in this room of what procurement skills are, I would wager you would get a huge diversity of what that means. You know, the traditional negotiation and legal and all that kind of stuff, but there's a whole bunch of others that will be as appropriate. Bring in good people and train them. In the BBC, we're bringing in people from our production and marketing areas to be good procurers, rather than sending in procurement people into the areas of marketing. And have a clear reward and development programme. I remember when we did put our first facilities management contract right across our national estate for the BBC, the sales director who was managing the successful company's bid, who I got to know very well over about 9 months of negotiation, he bought himself a Porsche Carrera with his bonus. And I got taken out by a nice lunch by my finance director. And it was almost an expensive lunch, but we had to adhere to BBC policies. But, you know, I'm not bitter. All I'm saying is that you know, these people are going to, in some areas, are the lifeblood to your organisation. Make sure you reward them and develop them, because that is important. And finally, the 4th step. Don't be that oil tanker that carries on regardless of where your business is going and what's happening to it externally. You've got to be agile, you've got to reinvent. You've got to do things like regularly review what procurement is contributing to the business. Okay, and that could change within 6 months or even earlier with some of this technology that is enabling us to do more. Keep looking at new ways to add value. Don't just keep focusing on the best deal. Find various things that you may not even be thinking about at the moment that could create some value for your organisation, particularly if the procurement function is focusing externally on what suppliers and other organisations are doing. Work the data, don't just pie chart. And this goes back to procurement and providing huge amounts of analysis, but you've got to work alongside the business to actually encourage them to do something with it. And if procurement doesn't do it, very often the business doesn't do it itself. Keep an eye on your talent and make sure you're motivating your stars, and gather and tell the stories that add the value or evidence the value that procurement gives to your organisation. So, they are the 4 steps that we're encouraging you to do. And here's a little takeaway for you that you might want to use. It's meant of a bit of amusement, really, to be honest. But the idea is that, you know, if you want to be a happy procurement function, and we all know we do, if you're heavily on the left-hand side there, if you're waiting for the business to instruct you on what to do, if you're just focusing on savings or you're seen as a service, if you're following the market and being reactive, you're looking at the best deal today and not about tomorrow, then there's a good chance that your procurement function will become completely automated in the coming years. If you're up on the right hand there, bringing options to the business, focusing on value, you are really seen as a truly strategic partner to your organisation. Look at your longer term planning and the strategic imperatives of the organisation. Make sure you are staffed by a very diverse mix of people with very, very different talents. And it's all about supplying the organisation not just today, but well into the future. So if you're on that right-hand side, I would say the threat of technology is not only gone, it will have disappeared. So we reach the final as provided by BBC Sport. So, 3 conclusions. I think that technology will actually help effective procurement functions do their job better. And those that enhance it and apply it properly and with strategic intent will see themselves rising above their competitors. I think that procurement will help organisations thrive and remain competitive. It could be as effective as the digital revolution, I would say, if procurement is really, really seen as a strategic contributor to the success of the organisation. But it all depends on 3 things. You need to keep a strategic profile. You need to attract and retain good people, and I've heard a lot today that good procurement people are very, very hard to find. So our challenge is that we find people that we can turn into good procurement people. That's how that one is resolved. And you need to make sure that you flex and change with the business. Don't be the oil tanker. Be that fast motorboat running alongside your business stakeholders, meeting the challenges that they're challenging. So that's the end, really. And now it's time for questions, if you have any. Or you may have observations on some of this stuff I've set out, because you may have a very, very different view.
Very, very good. I agree with virtually everything you said. I just wonder whether there's a bit missing in that when I thought about this future thing. It seems to me we've got to, as a profession, define what it is that we can do that the people in the business can't.
Yes.
And that I agree with you, we've got an advantage having this overview, but other people can get that.
Yeah.
We need to have great people, but every function would say that.
Yeah.
So what is it that actually means these wonderful procurement people can bring something to the stakeholders that makes the stakeholders go, wow, I didn't know that, or I don't know how to do that.
Yeah.
But you've got something that I haven't.
Yeah, I think more and more, Peter, it's about time, really. And I certainly, I mean, what I've seen in the BBC, that we've had an unprecedented sort of few years where the force of competition is really hitting the organisation hard, and we're actually stopping services. I mean, we've had to move a channel to the internet. And what we're finding is our people are focusing on their time, and I think procurement offers a team role in being able to supplement business stakeholders, do what they do well. So it's another team player. It's a bit like saying, you know, why have a goalie on a football team? You know, one of the other players can sort of stand in the goal mouth and do a similar job. So I think more and more, if you can position yourself as a very, very motivated and effective team member, that might address some of those things. No.
Doesn't that just make you the BBC management consulting, internal management consulting team?
No, it makes you a value team member. It makes you a value team member. I think, I mean, what I've seen in embedding our people is that they started off with a bit of arm's length stuff. They started off as the guy who was going to come in and make sure our processes were compliant, so when the National Audit Office came in, we could show that we were doing everything really, really well. But in a matter of just a few months, if I tried to get those people out of the business, they would not let me take them back into procurement because they're seen as a value contributor to what they do. So I think, you know, the proof is in the pudding, I think, in that respect.
Thank you for sharing your experience with us. I was just going to ask, have you ever had a situation with technology that's maybe hindered the business that you've experienced? Because you've promoted its positivity. I was just wondering if you'd had anything negative with technology from your experience.
I need to be a bit careful how I answer this one. Is the Daily Mail in the room, by the way? So we have. I think the BBC is a pioneer of adopting technology really, really early. And there are some incidences where we've just gone too far, too quickly. And there was a project called the Digital Media Initiative a few years back that tried to digitise elements of what we did very, very quickly, and it failed. And it was good it was called DMI, because now we refer to it as don't mention it. But it's a prime example where we try to employ technology really, really quickly and failed. And we got lessons from that. So that's the biggest thing, adopting it too quickly. We've not found any technology that's been, actually, what a waste of time that was. It was just the speed of adoption, I think, has been the problem. I think there was a question just over there as well.
Yeah, quick question. Fascinating presentation. Sorry, Tim Cole. You said you spend £1, you get 13 back.
Yeah.
How do you do that, and why don't you spend all your money on doing that?
What, getting £13 back?
Yes, it must be a saving. I'm sure you don't spend £1 and get £13 in your bank
Well,
account.
what I work out is I work out how much it costs to run the department, okay, and I divide that by the savings that it makes, okay. So when I've got my savings target, £76 million, divide that by 13 and you'll come up with the cost of my department.
Do you see that therefore diminishing over the next few years? You can't keep that ratio going?
No, I think going back to this refreshing your strategy and what you do, my department next financial year is the only department in the BBC that is getting extra funding, because I'm getting more money to save even more. So there comes a tipping point where you can't do any more, I think, with the resource that you have and the way you're targeting your resource into the business. So you either reinvest or you do things very, very differently. I mean, we're scaling down some of our activity particularly in the transaction area, to use machines more, actually. But we're not reducing our numbers in procurement, we're just getting higher caliber people in. There's a question just at the back there.
Hi, Jim. It's Duncan Brock from SIPS.
Oh, hello, Duncan.
Jim, I mean, you've presented in the past about outsourcing a lot of services in BBC, and you clearly just talked there about robotics in IBM and how that would change and reduce the significant cost of the outsourced services for finance. Yeah. What do you see about the rest of the services? Do you see robotics and technology really transforming that whole outsourced services business for the BBC?
For some of it, I think certainly for the back office activity, yes. We invest a lot of time dealing with our audiences, actually. So when you ring the BBC and they get all sorts of calls, you know, they get requests about wallpaper in EastEnders and where you can buy it from and all this kind of stuff. And finding those things out take a bit of time. But in audience engagement, we're starting to look at robotics there, so that particularly with younger audiences who are used to web chat and things like that, we're trying to use web chat to offer a more tailored service to our audiences. So if I'm a young person, I've heard of a couple of comedians called Morecambe and Wise, and I'd like to find out more about them, I can web chat the BBC and they may be able to help me do that. So in that kind of audience engagement, we see it as a potential growth area, Duncan, yeah. Thank you. Right, I think we may have time for one more, or we can finish it.
Thanks very much for the excellent presentation.
Yeah.
You mentioned the programme makers.
Yes.
And I should imagine the programme makers are probably a large portion of the budget for the BBC.
Yes.
What's your approach, what's procurement's approach to controlling, influencing, or something else perhaps, the activities of the programme makers and their own ability just to do their own thing?
Yeah. They're our hardest stakeholders, actually, the programme makers. They're the best negotiators in the world. They're the most creative people in the world, the most intelligent people in the world. In fact, they can do everything better than I can. But it doesn't stop me trying. And so what we've done is we get our people. So every program has a green light process. So is presenting the idea into the BBC. I've got an idea for a new drama. It's going to be this. First thing you've got to do is, once you've pitched the idea, you've got to present the budget. What I have now is I have one of my people at what these are called these green light sessions. And programme makers are actually inviting my team along now to see where we can take out cost. You know, can we use a really good, innovative special effects company rather than take our production out to Oman because I want some good desert shots? You know, it's that sort of stuff. And very often my guys are going off, particularly in the special effects area, to take out costs there. So program makers are coming on board, but they are our most difficult and challenging stakeholders. And you'll all have those.
Thanks.
Thank you. Right, I think it's time for your tea. So thanks very much for listening, and thank you for your questions. Thank you.